6:46 in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's get another business perspective. We've heard from Dr. Valmiki Arjun, Director of the Shagwanas Business Chamber, economist in his own right. But let's go now across to the Sister Isle to get the perspective of Martin George, attorney at law. He's the chairman of the Tobago Business Chamber. He's no longer, I should hesitate, he's quick to add, he's no longer involved with the Police Service Commission, given the fiasco that is going on there in relation to the appointment of a commissioner of police. It's you almost say, well, what next in a place like Trinidad and Tobago? But let's not divert ourselves from that discussion, Mr. George. Very good morning. I was hoping to tackle you on that if you were still a member of the Police Service Commission. But good morning to you, Martin George.
Yes, very good morning to you, Fazil, and good morning to your viewers on TV6, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Your perspective now, because as was expected, the matter was passed in the House. It's simple majority. It was a fait accompli. Your perspective.
Right. So, Fazil, I mean, while one can try to understand the rationale of the government for saying, well, look, we need to keep the restrictive measures in place, we have always said that curfews, lockdowns, and restrictions are not the solutions. They are merely containment measures. And I think the Prime Minister himself admitted that when he said that, look, the whole purpose of this is to restrict movement, to, curb the mingling, etc. So we're saying, all right, okay, yes, you have that on the one hand. However, what are the proactive, creative measures that the government is trying to take to also balance the scales? And that's where we're saying that they are not doing enough. In other words, if you've recognized that, say, for instance, vaccination is your path to fully reopening your economy, fully reopening your country, reopening, businesses and bringing people back to a normal state of life, then the government needs to do much more in terms of its vaccination drive, in terms of its marketing, advertising campaign. I have said so repeatedly. I have said that they need to, use a lot of our local stars, our local people who the public looks up to, get them on board with some sustained campaign to ensure that you get that message across. And then, of course, the government may need to set a timeline and say, well, okay, look, all right, okay, people, here's how it works. Let's set 1st January 2022 as a deadline by which, if we do not get our vaccination rate up to the acceptable standard of herd immunity, we will have to legislate to vaccinate. So you set that timeline. So in other words, you're giving people between now, right? We're in August. So people have the opportunity to voluntarily go in. So therefore, when 1st January 2022 comes around, nobody could say, well, you're trying to force this down my throat. You've had the opportunity voluntarily. We give you all the information. We give you all the literature, all the scientific data. I mean, Dr. Fauci said it last week in the US. He said 99.5 of all hospital admissions for COVID-19 is among the unvaccinated. So the statistics are there, the evidence is there, and the government needs to set some clear timelines. We cannot continue in this amorphous, mess of, just a state of emergency curfew and you hoping that things change. You also need to be proactive and take some definitive steps as a leader.
But Mr. George, I hear you on that, but wouldn't that, given the way people are behaving in relation to this thing, and it's all fueled by social media. The whole president thing yesterday, and her having to make a statement about her PCR test, which was misrepresented, and the Express wasted good editorial space today editorializing on it. Doesn't that tell you that if the government were to make it mandatory, there would be an even more furious backlash that could actually have more negative consequences than we're experiencing right now?
And for you, that's why I'm a student of law and I'm a student of history. This is not unprecedented. Remember when the smallpox virus was ravaging the world in the late 1700s to the early 1800s?
Would you allow me to jump in right here? Sorry. I know you're a student of history because you said the same thing the last time we were talking about it. But in the time of the smallpox, in the time of polio 40 years ago, we didn't have this nonsense called social media. And therefore...
okay, right. So you're looking at the social media aspect.
Exactly.
Yes, of course. And that is a serious thing. And the point is, the government has to have its own campaigns to ensure that they try to counter that. But the point is, Fazil, let me tell you, the Bible has said it so many years ago when Jesus said, there's none so blind as he who won't see. So regardless of how much knowledge, information, data you put in front of people, there are some persons who just choose not to see. You know, and the irony of it is that we are living in an age where we have access to the most amount of information, knowledge, and, you know, ideas, etc. And sometimes some people choose to remain more ignorant and uninformed than ever. So there are some persons you cannot change. So that's why you may have to take the decision, as unpopular as it may be, to say, listen, we have to legislate to vaccinate. So my first call to the government is, listen, try to ramp up your efforts to motivate to vaccinate. But you need to set a clear timeline, draw a line in the sand. Tell the nation, 1st January 2022, we will, if we don't get the numbers up, we will have to go to the... So in other words, you give people fair warning, you give them fair opportunity. And then also, you use creative strategies for you. Like, for instance, the government could start from now, introduce little piecemeal bits of legislation. Say, for instance, okay, for restaurants, you could say, listen, we want to see the restaurant sector reopen for in-house dining, but all patrons must be fully vaccinated. All staff must be fully vaccinated. All service providers must be fully vaccinated. These are ways that you can also now encourage people, because people may say, well, hey boy, we're having dinner here, but oh, well, you can't come because you're not fully vaccinated. Then the person might think, well, hey, listen, if I'm being denied this, then maybe I should look at this again and consider to be vaccinated. You could even open your bars to a certain extent the same way. So the point is, for you, what I'm saying is, listen, we understand that there's a need for, yes, you have to limit the movement of people, but while you're doing that, the government needs to do more. They need to be more creative, more flexible, more proactive in finding little ways to try to ease the strain on the economy, ease the stress on the population. I mean, even for instance, beaches and stuff like that, the government has to think in terms of ways. Maybe you can try to say, well, okay, look, you are going to allow the beaches to be reopened maybe for a limited time for the day, but at least give people a little breathing room. That's all we're asking for you.
Martin George, if you'd allow me, before, and I'll ask you your perspective on how seriously the Tobago community, business community would have been impacted. Let's say, okay, the government announces, not too far away from now, vaccination is mandatory in the workplace. Any workplace, vaccination is mandatory. So I call you, Mr. Martin George, prominent attorney at law. I want you to advocate on my behalf. I want to hire your services to advocate on my behalf that mandatory vaccination is a denial and depriving me of my human right to prevent things going into my body that I don't want to go into my body. And it is a human rights issue. Would you take the case?
Right. So the thing is, it's a situation where, okay, let's look at what has happened recently. We've seen the cases that were brought against the closure of the border. They all went to the High Court, they went to the Court of Appeal, and they were all rejected, because you always recognize that sometimes you have extenuating circumstances where the exigencies of the situation require certain decisive governmental action or intervention. And the courts are not blind to that. The judges recognize that, look, in these circumstances, certain tough decisions may have to be taken for the good of the people. And I know you said I mentioned it again, but I just want to remind the nation, in 1853, the UK had to pass mandatory vaccination legislation because people were not taking the smallpox vaccine. And they said, listen, for the good of the nation, whether you like it or not, you will be vaccinated. Of course, you will have measures whereby you allow for exemptions to be applied for persons who have valid reasons. Some persons, for either health reasons or religious reasons, may be able to make a case, and you treat with each of them on a per case basis. So therefore, you're not saying that, look, it can't be that you can't get an exemption, but you must make a case for it. But otherwise, if you don't have any valid reason for an exemption, you may have to make it mandatory. And we have to think in terms of that as the possibility.
And before we conclude, Martin George, what is the lay of the land in Tobago, in the Sister Isle, as far as the business community? Are they ramping up their efforts in any way? Have they given up on trying to persuade people to be vaccinated, or are they themselves skeptical about taking the vaccine? What is your perspective?
In Tobago, there's a particularly low uptake of the vaccination. You saw even the reports for the schools. The last report I saw was where the Secretary for Education, I think, mentioned that, look, less than 1,000 school children in Tobago had been vaccinated. That is abysmally low. Even among some of the teachers, you've seen very low, numbers. Even I remember a couple of weeks ago, the Chief Secretary himself said among health workers, only 53%. So therefore, you really have a serious problem in terms of getting that message across. And that impacts everything, because the fact of the matter is that if you have those low vaccination rates, then for sure, it means schools not going to be reopened. Some businesses will not be reopened. The tourism sector is going to be tremendously affected. And then remember, think of it for zero. If you're a tourist, say for instance, you're in England, Germany, London, wherever, Sweden, and you're looking for a country to plan a vacation for your family, who in their right minds is going to choose a country that's under a state of emergency and under a curfew? So therefore, in terms of international tourist arrivals, I mean, Tobago is dead in the water at this point. And then even for local tourism, which they used to depend on as the backup, you're not going to get that because the beaches are closed, the restaurants are closed, the bars are closed, and then you have only 3 flights running. What's the logic for only 3 flights? The government cannot, and we have challenged them all the time on that. What is the rationale and logic for only 3 flights between Trinidad and Tobago? They cannot give any logical justification, but yet still it remains crippling any attempts by persons who really want to, travel on either an emergency basis or just want to pick a quick hop over to Tobago or a quick hop back down to Trinidad. Think of a mother and a sick child in Tobago who needs to get to emergency, health services in Trinidad. Think of somebody who has to travel urgently for business purposes. 3 flights a day. It's ridiculous. Because you have government officials who just roll up to the counter with their entourage. They take up most of the flight. So that's it. You, the John public, you have to suffer. You have THA officials who are given priority. You have other ministry officials who are given. So then when you have that, and then you have the emergency personnel, you have police, soldiers, nurses, doctors. So then the ordinary man is always left last in that scenario. And it makes absolutely no sense when you have the boat running every day with a capacity of 800 people.
Martin George, we want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time. So many issues on the table, Mr. George. I'm just disappointed that you're not still involved with the Police Service Commission, because that is a juicy one that I would have really enjoyed engaging you with. But it is typical of the governance.
Have a great morning.
Thank you very much once again, Martin George, attorney at law and formerly involved with the Police Service Commission. I mean, that whole nonsense about the Commissioner of Police now being an acting Commissioner of Police until whenever the substantive Commissioner of Police is appointed is just so reflective of exactly what passes for governance in this place called Trinidad and Tobago. But we want to thank Mr. George for his perspective as well. As we come to the end of the first hour of a morning edition, we go to the news now at the top of the hour before what should be a very busy second hour of morning edition on this Thursday. The news right now.